Hi, I'm Selena from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester, and I'm here with Todd Keisling, who is he's a dark speculative fiction author or horror author. And we're kind of just starting a run of horror authors here. And for readers unfamiliar with your work, Todd, how would you describe what you write?
Well, I would probably describe it as literary dread. Uh, it's the kind of horror that is more atmospheric. Like I can get pretty brutal and get in your face with all the blood and guts and stuff, but usually there's a point to it. There's a purpose for it. It's not just there for shock value. Um, my, to give you an idea of my influences, Stephen King, obviously, that's a given. Clive Barker, John Langan, Laird Barron, those are my heaviest influences, I think.
Okay. And what do you think draws readers to these kinds of books?
Escapism, um, gosh, we could have a whole like panel about what draws people to horror. I
Yeah.
personally think that it has a little bit to do with it's built into our genetics almost like storytelling. Like everybody loves to hear a good story. We've been telling stories since, we were drawing paintings on cave walls. And a lot of those stories always served as warnings or, as fables almost, don't leave the village after dark. Don't go into the forest because this will happen to you. And I think in a lot of ways we gravitate toward those kind of stories for cathartic reasons. I think we do it for that thrill, for that sense of danger that we might not otherwise have in our lives. Uh, because we can experience it vicariously, essentially through a story. And there's no harm that'll come to you. There's nothing that's nothing's gonna leap off the page and hurt you, or maybe it will, I don't know. Maybe I'm just not reading the right books, but I think it has a lot to do with that. I think it has a lot to do with that sense of danger, that sense of mystery, and, you know, there's always got to be an element of danger in a good horror story. Otherwise, there are no stakes.
Hmm. Okay. Now, can you tell us a little bit about your latest book or the one that you're working on or it's coming
Sure.
out?
So I have a new book coming out in April from Shortwave Publishing. It is called The Sundowner's Dance. It is a novel about an elderly widower who, after his wife dies and he retires, decides to move into a retirement community for those over 55 in the Poconos area of Pennsylvania. And as he moves in, he learns that his neighbors are very strange. The head of the community association running the place is a bit obsessive and an odd fellow. And he comes to learn that his neighbors are all nightly worshiping a meteorite down in the community park. And things unfold from there. But it has to do a lot with there are some sci-fi horror elements. It's got, it is very much a horror story, but some of the horror has to do with the impact of dementia, um, growing old, mortality, grief, and loss. Uh, and then there's like worms. I won't say any more than that.
Large worms?
Maybe.
Oh, so what was the inspiration for this book?
So I still have it somewhere, but when I worked in a corporate office for many years, and about 7 or 8 years ago, I happened to write down a line that popped into my head on a post-it note, and the line said, "The worms in my brain dance at nightfall. had no context, nothing, I had no story to go with that line. And at the time, I was in the process of, trying to write a lot of short fiction. So I took that line, came up with you know, some semblance of the story and started writing it, which I then abandoned because I realized it wasn't going to be a short story. It wanted to be something longer. And I had just finished Devil's Creek, which to date is my longest work. And I just wasn't in the mood for something long form at that point in time. So it went through a couple of, it bounced around in my folder for, a few years. Almost collaborated on it with a buddy of mine, Chad Lutsky. That fell through because it just wasn't in the right headspace for it. And a few years after that, there was an open call. Well, it wasn't an open call. I got invited to write for an anthology that a couple of friends were editing, Shadows Over Main Street, Volume 3. And I dug out that old story and tried to trim it down to see if it could fit within the parameters of what they were looking for. And turned out, you know, no, it couldn't. It was a much bigger story. At the same time, my wife was waiting on biopsy results. We were worried that it was cancer. And, if you've ever had a biopsy, there's always this period of time where you kind of have to wait in limbo, waiting for an answer. And I was just really in my own head at the time, worried about, well, what if it's bad? What if it can't be operated on? What if it can't be treated? What am I going to do? I can't, my wife and I have almost been together for, well, 20 years this year, and I wouldn't know what the hell to do if without her. So all of those things kind of converged at the right time, and the Sundowner's Dance was the result.
Um, okay. Wow. So did you have to do any kind of research for it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I had to research how retirement communities work, how homeowners associations work, how dementia works. Sundowner's Dance is, of course, a reference to an element of dementia they call sundowner syndrome, where the effects of dementia actually get worse at nightfall. Uh, that had to look into that. Dementia runs in my family. It's a huge fear of mine. My great grandmother, with whom I was very close, suffered from it in her later years. My wife's grandmother suffered from it as well. It's just a very tough thing to watch someone almost become trapped in their own head. Uh, so, I kind of had some personal experience with that as well. But yeah, there was a fair amount of research involved.
Mm. How is your wife, by the way?
She's good. She's good.
Okay.
Everything was benign. She actually just had her annual checkup and all clear. So
Okay. Okay. Phew.
thanks.
Um, okay. So what was the biggest challenge that you had in writing and putting out Sundowners?
Oh gosh. Well, I kept resisting the story. Uh, like for example, I really didn't want it to be a long novel.
Hmm?
Just because, again, like even years after I'd initially attempted to write it, I just wasn't in the mood to write this sprawling epic tome like Devil's Creek turned out to be. So the first draft ended up being around 60,000 words, which is very short for a novel. I
Hmm.
sent it out for feedback with to some trusted, colleagues, and they came back with very good notes. And I took those notes, incorporated them, and that made the book get a little bit longer. It jumped to about 72,000 words. Now, to give you some, perspective, a 300-page novel depending on the trim size of the book, 300, 300 page novel is about 100, is about 90 to 100,000 words. That's the sweet spot. Um, I pitched it to an agent. I was and was transitioning in between agents at the time. I pitched it to my new agent. She loved it, and we, she gave me notes on that. Those notes I took into, to write another draft that grew the story by about 25,000, 30,000 words, something like that. And from that point, it was a matter of shopping this very weird story to publishers. And that that process can kind of be, it's like pulling your hair out sometimes. Uh, so it would be like, oh, we love this story, but it was too weird. Like, well, okay, that doesn't help me at all, you know. Uh, so we ended up going with a smaller press, Shortwave Publishing, and to answer your question, what was the most difficult part? It was probably the waiting. Wait through the whole submission period because, there I bet we sent it out to 100 publishers probably. And, it's always the waiting because it takes weeks sometimes for one editor to get back to you and tell you, yeah, we're gonna pass. So
You
that was
send
the
it out,
hardest part. Yeah.
you send it out one at a time, right?
Well, no, like we would send them out to like different editors in like batches. So like
Oh,
our top list of publishers would, we kind of broke them down into tiers. Like, okay, if these publishers pass, here's what we want to send them to next. Uh, or what we want to send the book to next. And just kind of worked that way. So there was always irons in the fire, so to speak. Because some got back to us quickly, some did not, some never got back to us, which was surprising. Um, and it was just kind of work our way through this massive list of folks who might be interested till we found one.
but when you were writing, did you, are you a pantser or an outliner?
I'm a little bit of both actually. So when I'm in the early drafting stages, first draft, second draft, I tend to pants. Like my personal process is basically I need a title, I need a big where to begin, and I need an ending. The ending doesn't have to be final. The beginning doesn't have to be final. I just need a place to start and a goalpost to see in the distance, to reach. The title kind of gives me a thematic tether to all of it, so I know like, okay, this is kind of what this story's, going to be about. And I found when I got the notes back from my agent, I tried something different than my normal process. I basically broke down the manuscript in an outline form, like a plotter would do. And that helped me to identify, okay, these notes that she's given me, these suggestions, which are very good, where do I put these in the flow of the story? So breaking it down into an outline of sorts helped me manage that. And the rewrites only took me maybe 3 months to do, and the original draft of the manuscript took me over a year. So
Mhm.
it very much helped me focus on what it was missing. And so to answer your question, I'm a planter.
I like that. So, what character in the book did you love or hate the most?
Character I loved was Jerry, the protagonist. He was based a little bit on my grandfather, Jerry, but he was also very much me, very much my my faults, my fears, um, and at the same time, like I gave him those traits, but I also got to, develop him, and he became this likable grandpa kind of figure who also just didn't take any crap from anybody. And, I tried to imagine myself, what will I be when I'm elderly? And like, well, I'm probably going to be introverted and curmudgeonly and just want to be left the hell alone. And that's Jerry to a T. Character I hated most. Oh man, that fluctuated actually. Initially, the character I hated most was a secondary character who introduced herself very early on in the story, and it she was actually the catalyst that caused the story to become much longer than I originally wanted it to be. She wasn't my favorite because I was resentful of her presence. But overall, I'd have to say the antagonist, Arthur Peterson. He is the head of the Fairview Acres Community Association, and he's that insistent, nagging, always smiling kind of guy who is manipulative and is always angling to get you to agree with his viewpoint, and is manipulative enough to like make you think that that's what you want when it's what he wants. Very gaslighting sort of individual.
I can see why you wouldn't like him. Now,
Yeah.
when you created the characters, did the characters really kind of move this, um, create the story more for you?
Uh, in the later drafts, yes. Like typically when I start a story, I have a good idea of who the protagonist is or who I want them to be. And I might have an antagonist in mind, but sometimes I don't. I just need like, okay, I need an archetype antagonist. He's the bad guy, okay? And whatever he does, he's gonna think that what he's doing is actually good and is gonna run opposed to whatever the good guy's trying to do. Uh, so early on, I knew I needed a bad guy. I wasn't sure who it was gonna be, and then Arthur introduced himself as the head of the, community association to Jerry. And, you know, I realized, okay, that's my villain because these two characters are so like intrinsically different and opposites of each other. And, one wants to be left alone and the other one wants to be all up in his business, you know. So you got these clashing, this natural, conflict right there, these two butting heads.
Okay. Do the characters kind of introduce themselves to you? I mean, you know what I mean? It's like um, a lot of times the characters just come to you.
Yeah.
Is that what happens?
Yeah. I mean, it absolutely happens. There are times where, like the previous example of the secondary character showing up unannounced, essentially, to me. They very much take on sentience in your own head, and they start acting and doing, reacting to things in ways that you hadn't planned. And by that point in the story, as the writer, you're not really the creator anymore. You're the recorder, and you're just reporting on what they're doing. Because they're gonna act and react, however they want, not necessarily how you, the author, wants.
Okay. So what else can we expect from you in the near future?
So the Sundowners Dance comes out in April. Um, I'll be supporting that with a few event appearances. And I'm currently working on a follow-up to my novel Devil's Creek that is titled Revelation Road. I am actually on track to finish it by tomorrow.
Wow.
It's a little bit of a longer book. It's about 120,000 words so far. I expect it'll be a little around 125 by the time it's done. Uh, it's one thing I should mention is that, Devil's Creek and a lot of my short fiction, The Sundowner's Dance, and even Revelation Road all exist in a shared universe. It's something I call the Southland mythos. It's adjacent to Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos, except it's set in rural Appalachia, the regions I grew up in. Southeast Kentucky, northern Tennessee, eastern Tennessee, even. So, Sundowners is the next entry in that series, and Revelation Road will be the one after that, provided we can sell it quickly.
So how did you come up with this universe?
It it was born from being a fan of cosmic horror when I at a young age. You know, I grew up in a southeastern Kentucky town. We were very limited in what we had access to in terms of books. There wasn't Amazon didn't exist at the time. So I was stuck with whatever my local bookland had. I discovered Lovecraft when I was a teenager, and that led me down a rabbit hole of other cosmic horror authors like Block and Mackin and Chambers. And one thing that I couldn't really relate to in those stories was that everything was in New England. So I wanted to write something in that vein that was in more of like my backyard, what I was familiar with and could speak to with authority. And that all came to light in Devil's Creek, which is based on my hometown. And I wanted to do basically like a Lovecraft in the South sort of thing that exists in the context of Lovecraft's pantheon, but is entirely different and new. And I kind of look at it as like my contribution to the cosmic horror genre. So that's how that all came about. I basically just wanted something that my own kind of sandbox to play in, kind of like how King has his Dark Tower universe and everything.
Okay, great. Now I have questions about being a writer.
Sure.
What's your favorite part about being a writer on the whole writing and publishing process?
Having written as being the typing the end on something is probably my favorite because I kind of look at writing a story as a bit like going to war with yourself because I deal with mental health issues and ADHD and finding being able to filter out all the noise of life and focus for a period of time on something that I'm creating from scratch in my own head is challenging the older I get. Um, it's the case in point, as a matter of fact, I got the alert 15 minutes before the Zoom call, and I had completely forgotten it because I had been so lost in my head working on this novel. And so I realized, like, oh crap, I got to do this. And so I had to kind of like step out of the zone, look presentable for the camera and, you know, step aside and do that for, do this interview. But then after we're done, I'm immediately going to have to jump back into this thing, even though I know I need to take out the trash. I need to do all these other things around the house. And it's, I'm constantly battling myself to procrastinate. Procrastination is the war, is really the war in a sense. It's do I want to sit down and write and do this creative thing, but I've got this laundry list of other chores I have to do, and it's like, well, maybe I can do one and set the other one aside, prioritize, and all this crap. And so, yeah,
Mhm.
that's that's the war.
Okay. So, what do you consider the most challenging part of the writing process? Is it the war?
It's the first draft, believe
Ah,
it or not. It's just the first draft's purpose is to just exist. And, it's the story for better or worse. It's going to be full of flaws. It's going to have elements that don't get wrapped up in the end, elements that just don't really have any purpose of being there. And it's the process of bringing it into being. Like editing, revising, I love that because I don't have to write something new for that most of the time. I can usually just revise what is already written. It's when you're actively creating it from the ether, essentially, and finding the right word and putting those words in the right arrangement in a sentence that might make sense to the reader. Maybe it doesn't. It's there's a lot of uncertainty in it, and I find that that whole process is a struggle sometimes. Uh, the novel, Revelation Road, I've been working on since 2022, off and on. It's only this year that I've actually buckled down to work on it, in earnest. So it's the war.
okay. So, what's been your favorite adventure during your writing career?
In what respect? Just writing or in the process or just
Just your favorite adventure, your favorite thing that's happened during your writing career.
probably finding my audience or conversely seeing the audience find me. Because, I've mostly worked in the small press world, for the better part of 20 years. And promotion is always it's a crapshoot. Even when the publisher has a budget to get your work out there, you never know if people are going to be receptive to it. And there's a certain point where you kind of have to just say, okay, we've done all we can do. Let's focus on the next thing. And, you know, uh, a buddy of mine gave me, some very good advice many years ago, and he said that the best way to sell that book is to write the next one. And is absolutely true. I have, been driven by that advice, and it has absolutely been true. Every time you release a new book, there might be more people who are receptive to it. And then you can say, well, if you liked that, then I also have this other work that you might enjoy. And that experiencing being at a convention or at a book event and having someone walk up to me with a book in their hand, but it's not the book that I'm there promoting. It's something that I wrote years ago. And them tell me, what that book meant to them and how they discovered it. That has been like, I can't even properly articulate what that feels like. And it's just, you know,
Mhm.
seeing the work pay off. Like it's a reminder that this isn't a race. It's not a sprint. It's absolutely a marathon.
Okay. So, what's the greatest lesson that you've learned during your writing career?
Greatest lesson. Do your diligence on small presses before you sign with them. Yes. I have had a bunch of pitfalls in my career where publishers weren't honest or publishers weren't as diligent, I'll say. And that it's a tough lesson that I think every writer has to learn, unfortunately. I wish it weren't so. But the publishing world is full of predators, and they want to prey upon your desire to get your words in print. And, when I was starting out, I signed on with some anthologies that in hindsight I really shouldn't have. Uh, I think that's a tough lesson, but it's one every writer has to come to in their time.
Advice. And is there any other piece of advice that you would want to share with other writers aside from what you've already said?
Yeah, value your work. Don't give it away for free unless it's for charity, and always sell your work at the highest rates you can. Don't just because somebody is offering, to buy your work with exposure, doesn't and they're willing to publish it. Well, that doesn't benefit you at all. It's exposure. You get exposure from having your work out there, yes, but exposure doesn't pay your bills. It doesn't put food on the table. And if you want to make an actual career of this, you have to value your work. You have to know what your work is worth. And again, that's a lesson that every writer has to learn on their own time. Usually it's related to the last point, do your
Great.
diligence on the publisher.
Uh-huh. Excellent. Excellent advice. Are there any groups, clubs, or organizations that you'd recommend to other writers that may have helped you in your career?
Ah, well, my go-to is normally the Horror Writers Association. They're in a bit of a state of flux right now over the whole AI thing. Um, I'm very, I'm hesitant to just recommend them blindly. I would say do your research, read up on the latest. Same goes for the SFWA, the Science Fiction Fantasy Writers of America. Um, check out the Authors Guild. Check out Writer Beware. Always keep that handy. I know Victoria Strauss does great work at Writer Beware, just putting the word out about all the many industry pitfalls and new bad actors that arise. Other than that, I would say just cultivate a group of trusted people, of trusted peers, not necessarily friends, but peers. People who do the same thing you do, are trying to do the same thing you do, and whose opinions you value. Uh, you can make a writers group and find people that way, but I've had diminishing returns with actual writers groups. I think it's better to find your peers in the industry and people you actually trust to give you honest feedback. Positive feedback is great, but it can quickly become an echo chamber where all you're hearing is the good. Like you need to learn how to, one, want to hear the bad and learn how to parse the bad because some bad feedback is actually good in the scheme of things. Some bad feedback is trash. Learning how to parse that out, sort the good negative feedback from the bad negative feedback, uh, figuring out how to approach it and implement it and, make your story better. Um, so that's why I'm hesitant to say, join this group or,
Mhm.
you know, join a writers group because, and oftentimes in my experience, writers groups really are just an echo chamber because no one wants to be the bad guy. No one wants to give you bad feedback. They don't want to, because you never know how feedback is going to be taken with someone you don't know very well.
Mhm.
And it's a group of peers that you kind of understand each other and understand what you're out after and, what you're doing with your work. You know, in that case, it's a mutual understanding that, their feedback, even though it's critical, is coming from a good place with the goal of making the work better. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely it does. I think that's excellent, excellent advice. Okay, now I have questions about you as a person.
Oh, okay.
What is one thing that most people don't realize about you?
This is pretty well known in the horror world, but maybe not widely. I'm also a graphic designer. I'm also a visual artist. It's actually how I paid my bills the last few years. I'm 100% freelance, um, because working in a corporate environment was slowly killing me. And I'm proud to say that I've been able to support my family with my work, and it's not just writing, it's visual. And a lot of people I don't think realize that. Like I design book covers, I design, interiors for books, I do typesetting, I do a lot of that stuff. I'm deeply involved in the actual making of the book rather than just being the one to write the story.
Do you design your own books?
I have. In my cemetery dance titles, I actually was hired on to design. They hired me to design the interiors and covers for my own work. It's not often the case. I haven't, I'm trying to get away from that just because I have other work graphically that I need to be doing rather than my own stuff. Um, but yeah, I have. My work has, my visual work has won an award in the past for a book cover I designed several years ago. Um, and I've designed the last three StokerCon souvenir anthologies for the HWA. Done that. Uh, you you'd be surprised how much of my work I work much of my work is out there right now.
So, what is or are your passions when you're not writing, and how do you make time to do the things that you love?
Who needs sleep, right? Uh,
Yeah, that's one thing that you absolutely have to have.
yeah, I'm very passionate about naps. Um, but more seriously, I think I love to read when I have the time to do it. Sometimes I have to carve out the time to do it. Um, Obviously, I love to read because I write stories, they kind of go hand in hand. Uh, I love watching movies. I studied film for a while, in high school and in college. Seriously considered going into screenwriting, but I enjoyed the freedom of writing, prose as opposed to, scripts. Writing prose isn't as tied to a certain structure and a certain, flow as screenwriting is. But I do appreciate, film a lot. Uh, I've studied foreign film, German specifically, and you know, if it's a good movie, I'll watch it. You know, I'll I really dig like a lot of the stuff coming out of Asia, Korea, Japan. Um,
Not
but
just
beyond
horror.
that, yeah, just horror in
Just
general.
horror?
And
Really?
yeah, I mean mostly horror. I also have my share of, artsy films that I'll watch. My wife can't stand anything coming out of A24 studios because of this, but I love their films. I think they were, in a lot of ways they were made for me. Um, and I'm also a huge nerd for video games and, stuff like that. That's my downtime is I'll go watch a movie or I'll read something or I'll play a video game. And I think video games especially are looked over when it comes to methods of conveying a narrative. They're, underappreciated in that respect. There are a lot of different ways, a lot of ways that games have influenced my writing and how I approach a story. So yeah, those are
So,
my other passions.
how so?
Just changing the way I think about them, changing the way that, okay, maybe I had this character in mind to be the protagonist, but I played a game and I realized, okay, what if I had this other character approaching the story from this angle? It completely changes the approach. Um, some examples would be um, Alan Wake and Alan Wake 2. Those are games about a mystery writer, thriller writer, and what happens when he comes upon the supernatural. And when the first game came out in 2010, I was really struggling to finish my second novel, The Liminal Man, which is the second book of the Monochrome trilogy. I was really struggling to finish that first draft. And playing Alan Wake, even though I was active at the controls and stuff, in the background, I'm analyzing how this plot is put together and how it's presented and how certain things are revealed. And it almost acted like a refresher course on how to tell a story. And it, I finished that game and was blown away by it. And then I went back to my manuscript with a fresh set of eyes and realized, okay, I know what happens next. I know how to get there. I know how to do this. It wasn't just nebulous, a nebulous void between where I was and where the finish line was. I actually could see through that and see how I needed to structure this, how this event would impact this, and how it would all flow together. So I credit Alan Wake for the completion of that novel.
Great. Okay. So, what does your writing space look like? And what do you need to have around you when you're writing or editing?
Well, you're kind of looking at it. You
Yes.
can't see my desk or anything. My desk is full of reference books, and there's a pile of books over here that is in danger of leaning too far and falling over. Those are my Merrimack books, actually.
Uh,
And there's another pile and another shelf against the wall, and shelves of books on both sides here. This shelf down here is actually my brag shelf. Those are all my stuff that I've been published in or my books. And I need a dedicated space, obviously. This is like a converted, child's bedroom in my house. It's very small, but it's me sized. And
mhm.
you need a good chair. You need a very comfy chair because you're going to be sitting in it for a long time. I need light, but I also need the darkness sometimes. I have nice speakers above mounted on the walls because I listen to music when I write. Good headphones with noise cancellation. Um, and multiple monitors because sometimes you need multiple windows open with two different drafts. So, or I
Mm,
do anyway.
interesting.
So it's also peppered with little knickknacks and totems of from my career, little horror things. Like I've got a statue of Cthulhu right here. I got several statues of Cthulhu actually. I have a couple of sculptures that my friend Tony Rapino made for me. He did this one for his Kickstarter project a few years ago. It's like a pumpkin god kind of idol. He also sculpted the idol from Devil's Creek,
Wow.
which pretty cool. That's based on a drawing that I did, and he nailed it. You can actually get these on his website, if people are interested. Yeah, little things like that. Like I've got a Pennywise phone holder. Just little silly things like this that kind of improve the vibe, the mood, the atmosphere. Uh, and I don't know, I like to think that I channel their energies when I write. It's almost meditative in that respect.
So, what kind of music do you listen to when you're writing?
It depends on the vibe I'm going for in the story. The music absolutely influences my process. If I'm writing a very violent scene, I am listening to something very fast, very heavy. Um, like for example, Like my playlist that I have, I make a playlist for every project I work on. And like my playlist for Revelation Road has songs by Sleep Token, In This Moment, Nine Inch Nails, AC/DC, stuff like that. Other playlists are much lighter because they're lighter in tone or somber. But my go-to music always, because they're my favorite band, is Nine Inch Nails. I'll listen to them all day, every day, you know, if I can.
So, when you're writing, I see you're drinking something. Do you have, yeah, water? Okay. Do you have any other drinks or food or anything that you like to use when you're writing?
So I think this is possibly an autistic trait, because I'm definitely that. But I like to have something for hydration, something for taste, and something for caffeine. So I usually have a bottle of water, either like a drink of some kind that has flavor to it, or like a soda, and then I'll have a mug of coffee. And as I work through, like I know that's my cue when it's time, when it's time to take a break is when I've worked my way through all three of those.
Sounds good. And writers very often have furry or feathered or otherwise non-human companions to either help or hinder them through their work. And do you have any? And do they help or
Yes,
hinder you?
a little bit of both. I have four cats. Um, they're all jerks, but I love them. Uh, I'm kind of surprised one of them isn't in here with me. Our youngest is a Norwegian forest cat, and he's very much got to be attached to your hip at all times. But he likes to jump on my desk and distract me or just stare at me while I'm trying to write. If you follow me on social media, you have no doubt seen him. We also have um, a Turkish Angora. She's white and very, very much a princess, and she's beautiful, and she knows it. She has me wrapped around her finger. Sometimes she'll join me in the evenings while I'm writing. And then we have our two boys, two big boys anyway, tuxedo named Czar and an orange tabby named Obi.
You definitely get attached to you.
Yeah, I'm absolutely a stereotype. I'm absolutely that weird reclusive writer who has cats and subsists on caffeine.
Okay. Um, so where can people find your work besides Annie's Bookstop of Worcester? Although they should definitely check here.
Yes,
First.
absolutely.
We can get we can get Todd's work at Annie's if you call us at 508-796-5613, or you can email us at orders@anniesbooksworcester.com. And where else can people find your work?
You can find my work online wherever fine books are sold, like Annie's Bookstop of Worcester. Um, that my books are available direct from the publisher as well. Pre-orders alive for the Sundowners Dance. Seriously, just Google my name and a million things pop up. Most of them positive, I promise. And yeah, and there's my website as well. I do sell signed copies on occasion, not often, on my site. But for all information regarding Todd Keisling, you go to toddkeisling.com, and I'm on socials as well.
Hey, and your social accounts. How can we follow your work and share your awesomeness?
I'm on Blue Sky, just as Todd Keisling, all one word. I'm on Twitter. I refuse to call it X. For the time being, at Todd_Keisling. I'm also on Instagram as Todd Keisling, all one word.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Todd. You've given some great information. some of your answers were really wonderful and different than a lot of other people's. So I thought that was great. Well, so
Thank you.
thank you very much for joining me today, and hopefully we'll be seeing more of you and more of your
Yeah.
books.
Thanks for having me, Ann.
Todd Keisling.